So one of the things, if you don't know me, if you're on Chris's team, I think I know everybody, but just in case. My name is Danielle Presso, and I serve as the Director of Life Groups here at Greenbelt. And so Chris and I decided it would be really beneficial to bring both teams together to do a bit of a workshop on cultural diversity. And why? There's basically a few reasons why. If you look around at our church family, you'll see that we do have a lot of diversity in this place that where we have God's children of from many different backgrounds and cultures and so on. So it's really important for us to be able to understand one another and celebrate one another's differences, uniqueness, but also that we are all one in God's family. So really thankful for that. The main thing that we're looking at is why? Because Jesus said, "Go and make disciples of all the nations, yes. Baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age." So, signed, Jesus. That was right. So we're thankful. And it actually starts with therefore, and we want to look at what's it there for. It starts off with, because Jesus said all authority in heaven and on earth was given to him. So we come together as daughters and sons of the Lord Most High. We come together as Jesus as our authority. So for that reason, we are coming together and we want to make sure that we are making disciples of all the nations. So that being said, I just want to show you kind of this book that I've been using to kind of formulate our presentation for today. It's called Foreign to Familiar by Sarah Lanier. And she kind of divides up the world, generally speaking, into two categories, sort of hot climate cultures and cold climate cultures, and there are exceptions to the rule. So that's kind of what I'm using as my foundation for what we're teaching on today. But before I do that, I'd like to invite Kevin up to also welcome us all together. And perhaps pray for our time.
I was getting all excited. I was like, "Oh, she forgot about me, so this is great. I don't have to come out."
Oh, because you hate being up here, I know.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's everyone. They hear me all the time. So, anyway, I just want to thank everyone for coming out this morning on this beautiful hot summer day. It's funny. I was talking with my daughter Samantha this morning, and we were talking about how I have a friend of mine who lives in Australia. She has 6 kids. And had to bring in an exterminator because they had these deadly spiders in their backyard. And I'm like, that's why I love Canada. Because every January we would wipe those suckers off the face of the country. So God bless Canada and our cold weather, because we don't deal with deadly spiders, in our backyard. One of the things that I'm excited about this ministry year, and I'm so grateful for you guys taking the time to grow in your service and in your leadership, is one of the things that's been on my heart, especially this past year as I've been going through this sabbatical leadership development, is when we look at life, when we look at ministry, when we look at church, a lot of the ways that we handle life and ministry and church is when things grow. When you think of your life, when you think of, the way you parented when you had 1 kid, and then you have 2 kids, and then you have 3 kids, and some of you crazy people have 4, 5, or 6 of them, you just keep going. And how your family dynamic changes, and the way you parent after 4 kids, I'm looking at you, Dan Adams. The way you parent with 4 kids is radically different than how you parented with 1 kid. Right? If you think of your job, like if or if you had your own company, the way you handled 3 clients is radically different than when you handle 300 clients, right? And it's the same thing with church and ministry. How you organize, how you structure, how you lead a church of 80 is very different than how you lead and structure a church of 500. And what I see so often with church leaders is we get into the mentality of, as the church grows, I'm just going to work harder. I'm going to do everything that I've always done before, but I'm going to just do it harder. If I just put in more hours, right? If I just have more meetings, if I just kind of have more pastoral visits, then that will just kind of sustain it. And what actually we see happen statistically time and time again is working harder doesn't actually help. Working harder actually makes us more frustrated, it makes us more tired, it makes us just want to stop doing it. And then we actually see we're less effective and efficient in ministry. So my heart for us this year is not for anybody to work harder, but for all of us to learn to work smarter. And I'm leading the charge in this because I have to stop working harder and learn to work smarter. So I joke around with our staff, and I'll share one of my little deep dark secrets with you today, is I am a technology guy. You know this. You know I love toys. You know I love technology. But because I have to work smarter, not harder, I've gone back to a paper agenda. I know, weird, right? I know, it's like big, what? Because this is actually a better system for me to be organized than trying to do it on my phone. And in fact, I've had to restructure my entire week because we have more leaders and people helping out with Sunday morning, that this morning I just finished writing my sermon. Not for tomorrow, but for next Sunday. So it's written, and I've already got my outline written for the next Sunday. And so this is just kind of the way we're thinking now. It's not about working harder. We have to learn how to work smarter. So that's what I'm excited about with what Danielle and Chris are doing with you and your teams. Is don't think, just work harder, roll up your sleeves, do more hours, commit more to the Lord. No, that's not what we're asking. We're asking us to, as the church is growing, and when you think of it now we have 3 worship services going on here. Woo! Like who would have thought that? Like who would have thought that? Like even like just a couple of years ago, we have like one and in 2 different languages. Danielle is just working with her leadership, and we're going to be starting a Spanish life group this week. So now we're going to have life groups in 3 languages. And it's like, well, okay, God, we got to start getting ready for a Spanish congregation. I know there's a struggling Spanish congregation down the road. Maybe we should have another conversation. I don't know. But this is the kind of stuff that we're praying about in our heart, my heart, the elders' heart, is for all of us not to get stressed out, burnt out because we're working so hard and seeing no results. It's making those decisions, just like you did in your family. You naturally changed how you led your family when you started having more kids. You naturally changed how you did things when your company grew, when your business grew, when whatever you work at grew. It's the same thing in church life. Sometimes we get so close-fisted, we've always done it this way. Well, we can always do it this way and watch everyone get burned out, frustrated, and angry. Or we can wrestle with some of this stuff together and learn how to do things a new way, a better way, so that we can actually enjoy and love ministry and serving that way. So again, I just wanted to thank you for coming out today and investing this time as leaders. You know, I pray for you guys all the time. We love serving with all of you, and I'm just excited about what Danielle and Chris are doing in their leadership teams, and just hope we continue to have a great morning together. And why don't I pray for us? Okay. Well, Father God, we praise you and thank you for this church family called Greenbelt and how you are truly doing immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine through your power at work. God, we praise you that you are displaying your glory through our lives, individually and as a church family. And God, I pray that this morning that you would help us to learn and to grow, to be better disciple makers of all the nations, of being better equipped to reach all the nations for Jesus. And God, I just pray that you would just bless our time together with lots of learning, lots of laughter, and lots of great food. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
All right, so for those of you that do like to follow along, in the center of your table, I think there's like 3 packets of the PowerPoint slides with notes section for notes. If there's not enough at your table, please raise your hand for those of you that want some, because I have a couple more up here.
No. There's 3 packages. It's not 3.
Sorry, I didn't staple.
Is there 4 pages? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
There's 4 pages.
Yeah, there's 4 pages, so 3 packets of 4 pages is in a packet.
That sounds like a tough.
Okay.
I don't go back.
Hey, got this, man. Got this,
All set?
Do you have an extra page 1?
Yeah.
We got page 2, 3, and 4. I have one.
I'll just give you the whole packet and you take what you need. Okay, as I mentioned, the foundation of what we're talking about today comes from this book, Foreign to Familiar. And so I just want to read from Sarah Lanier's intro, just to give us a little bit of a framework for where we're going. So she says, cultural differences among us provide both the richest color to our lives and the harshest wounding. Simple communication creates conflict. Innocent comments produce withdrawal and gossip. Living and working with people of different cultures used to be a novelty, but no longer. Virtually everywhere we turn, we encounter people with very different values and customs, and we often find them to be offensive. The book divides the world into two halves, hot climate cultures and cold climate cultures, making generalizations that prove to be helpful if taken as that, generalizations. So what we're going to talk about today is by no means, this is absolutely the way it is in these cultures and this is absolutely the way it is in these cultures. We're looking at generalizations that might help us to understand people who think differently, people who have values different from our own. And the approach of this book I so appreciate because it doesn't say, we as Westerners need to understand this about Easterners. It says, generally speaking, those that come from these hot climate cultures have these types of values. Generally speaking, those that come from cold climate cultures have these types of values. So it's really not any kind of helping one group understand the other versus helping one understand the first. It's helping us to understand one another, okay? So that's kind of that framework that we're starting from. So hot and cold cultures was actually an idea that came from Thomas Jefferson, the American president in the 1700s. And so from that, I just want to read you a little excerpt, and then that'll be the last one I turn back to here. So Thomas Jefferson was writing to the Marquis de Chastellux in September of 1785. And I find it really fascinating. He didn't necessarily, use any complimentary terms per se, but he was describing the differences between his country, northern United States and southern United States, and how he was marking huge differences between the two groupings. So he says in the north, they are cool, sober, laborious, persevering, independent, jealous of their own liberties, and just to those of others interested, chicaning superstitions and hypocritically in their religion. In the south, they are fiery, voluptuary, indolent, unsteady, independent, zealous for their own liberties, but trampling on those of others. Generous, candid without attachment or pretenses to any religion but that of the heart. So he was sending this to a French general at the time, basically saying the guy had come and checked out United States, and it was kind of the first time somebody's come over from France to kind of see what's going on. And I can only guess there must have been some comments. Wow, the people here, interesting. There's some interesting things that I've noticed. And so Jefferson writes back, yes, I've noticed these differences between the south and the north. And he says the further we get from the north, the more, these what would you call them, attributes are less so. And the further you get from the south, the southern attributes are less so. And he talks about, you get to like Pennsylvania and you kind of have that mix between the two. So I thought that was really interesting because this writer, Lanier, takes that as her kind of first view on hot and cold cultures and there being maybe a difference between the both. And so she says, somewhat like Jefferson's observations on America, the population of the entire world can roughly be divided into two parts. Hot climate, or otherwise possibly looked at as relationship-based, and cold climate, or task-oriented. So in your groups at your table, just for 2 minutes, what do you see yourself as? Are you more, regardless, I know we're freezing, but we all have our own We all have our own tendencies. Like you can even look at here in Canada. If you're from the Maritimes, there's some differences than if you're here, if you're from Toronto, right? So look at yourself, your bent. Don't speak about anybody else but yourself. And would you consider yourself closer to the hot climate, relationship-based, or cold climate? Take 2 minutes to do that. So did you learn something about others in your table group? You don't have to share. You all had a chance to learn something about yourselves or somebody else in the table group? What you might notice fascinating, I know at our table group, and I will not name names because I won't do that, but we have within our table group people who have grown up in cold cultured Canada who have, one is more hot cultured and one is more cold cultured, and a couple of us that are warm cultured. Right down the middle. And so I just say that for you to note that it's not about us and them or them and us. It's about we are all people who have our own tendencies and our own ways and what kind of works for us. And we can also see, even at our table it came up, oh boy, if I'm more task oriented and I'm more relationship based, how are we going to get anything done together? And already those kind of conflicts that can come up relationally or getting a job done because this is how I think of things and my values come from, and somebody else, well, but this is how I do. So we can see that conflict can arise. So basically, and again, let's try to keep with generalities. As I said, and we showed even at our table groups, there's various differences amongst us. But generally, and in generalities, we can look at Canada as a cold country, northern U.S. states,
I'm surprised.
Northern Europe, Israel, New Zealand, the white population of New Zealand, Australia, southern Brazil, South Africa, again with the white population, and Argentina. Then in the hot cultures, southern U.S. states, Asia, the Pacific Islands, South America, except urban Argentina, Africa, the Mediterranean countries, the Middle East, except Israel's Jewish population, and other parts, most of the other parts of the world. So sink that in for a second. I don't think this is the most important takeaway of our day as to who comes from where and what typically would be the hot or cold cultures, but just to give you a general idea of where predominantly those values kind of come from, as according to Lanier. Okay? So when we look at cold and hot cultures, we look at relationship, and I don't like, she uses the term versus. I don't ever want to use versus because it's not one against another. But she's looking at the concepts, relationship concept versus the task orientation concept, okay? So when it comes to hot culture, they're very relationship based. Everything is about the relationship. Communication has to create that feel-good atmosphere. We're okay, everything's good, we're making sure we're coming from the same page, we'll give a hug and everything's going to be fine, we'll smile, it's all good. Society is in warm or hot cultures are feelings orientated. There's efficiency and time do not take priority over the person. Person first, then the task next. Business talk is inappropriate upon first arriving, even if it's a business meeting or a business phone call. So to understand that, it's relationship. There's work to be done, yes, but it's not going to be the first priority. It's going to be secondary to the relationship. We're here for communication, for connection, for unity, for making sure we feel good about our time together, and secondary is we're going to get the job done. Now, on the other hand, with task orientation, obviously task-oriented, communication must provide accurate information. Society in these colder climates is logic-oriented. Efficiency and time are high priorities, and taking them seriously is a statement of respect for the other person. So you can see how when you're people who are more oriented to one side or the other, right away when you come into a meeting, there's a conflict in terms of what we're actually hoping to have to accomplish within that meeting. A relationship-oriented person is coming in to feel good, to feel like we've had that connection. And a task-oriented person is coming in going, there's a job to be done here. Like enough with the kissy, right? So there's just a real difference when you look at both sides of that coin. Something that I didn't mention but I want to bring up is that just some of the theories as to why there might be differences, why climate makes a difference between these two kind of, one more relationship oriented and task oriented, could be agriculture versus industry. So in an agricultural society, people are living off the land. It tends to bring this sense of togetherness, interdependence, being outdoors for one, seeing one another, whereas industry is that go, 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 time is money. Could be to do with in cold temperature climates, people are indoors. How many of us are hanging out outside? Yeah. Oh look, we're indoors. Yes, we do have winter activities and so on, and you might notice here in Canada, we come out in the spring and it's like, oh, new neighbors, I didn't know they moved in November. Or, people that I haven't seen since like almost a year ago because, we just don't have that in our society today in many of the colder cultures, so that could have something to do with it. Lanier's theory, though, herself, is that she says she believes we all began as hot climate societies before the Industrial Revolution. So she's like, dun, dun, dun. Then the Industrial Revolution came and our hot climate cultures and togetherness and unity and all these things changed and became more of an independent kind of a way of living in the colder climates. So another thing that I want to highlight is communication. Difference between direct communication and indirect communication. So with that, with direct communication, we have short, direct questions, and we show respect for the person's time as well as professionalism. A yes is a yes and a no is a no, and there's no hidden meaning behind it. If I say, here's what we're going to do, how about blah, 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 and you say, yes, I'll do it, there's the expectation, yes, it will be done. So an honest, direct answer is information only. It doesn't reflect on you how the person feels about you. So somebody who's a direct communicator will say, no, I'm not coming on Friday night. Somebody who's more, on the indirect side or relational side might say, oh my gosh, they hurt my feelings, I can't believe they're not coming. Whereas this was just, I'm not free on Friday night, right? So you can see some of those conflicts that can arise. You can say what you think nicely, and it's usually not to be taken personally in direct communication. And then with indirect communication, it's all about being friendly. Questions have to be phrased in such a way as to not offend by its directness. Sometimes in indirect communication, there's a third party involved for accurate information. If you sense that a direct question will be too harsh or not get the results you're seeking, so I might say like, "Hoy, would you chat with Karen about such and such?" And then it's off of me and it's on Hoy, so we can still have friendly silence. A yes may not be an answer to your question. It may be the first step in beginning a friendly interchange, or verbal compliance may be required by the culture. So some cultures, it is yes. Whether you mean yes or you don't mean yes, you're going to say yes, because that's a way to have that friendly interchange. And also, indirect communication is there to avoid embarrassing people. So, for example, if somebody invites me out and I say yes, even though I mean no, it's less embarrassing for that person in the group to hear yes than it is to hear no. But now I've got a bit of a problem on my hands. Am I going or am I not going? How am I going to handle that? So I remember I taught a student once. I used to teach in college and adult students, and one of the students, anytime I was giving him any direction on his work, he would smile and nod and, you know, this is what I'm expecting and this has to, you know, it has to happen for the next essay because you'll lose grades otherwise and so on. But, okay, yeah. Big smile, nodding. He fully understood as far as I was concerned. But later, the same thing came back. And then when I talked to him again and said, I thought you understood that this and this and this. Oh, yes, absolutely, yes. And his understanding was good, but I came to realize it was a cultural difference. When he was saying yes and smiling, it was to ensure we still had that friendly communication happening. It was his indirect style of communication based on his background. Any questions so far? All right, another area to look at is individualism versus group identity. So in an individualistic culture, I'm a self-standing person with my own identity. Every individual should have an opinion and can speak for themselves. One must know how to make one's own decisions, and my behavior reflects on me, not on the group. So I often think of, like, here's my daughter who's in grade 10. She has so many choices of what she wants to be in school, and she has no clue what she wants to do. Well, if she was in a group identity culture, there would be a very good chance that she would do what I do, or she would do what her, you know, our kids would do what their parents do. Your individuality doesn't matter as much in terms of what you're going to choose for a career. The value is we are a community, we are a group. So in the group identity, there's I belong to the group, therefore I am. My identity is tied to the group. My family, my tribe, where I come from is very important, and it is actually my identity, and I have that sense of that's my truth of who I am. The group protects and provides for me. Taking initiative within the group can be greatly determined by my role. My behavior reflects on the whole group. The southern United States would be a hot climate culture that does not necessarily fit this group orientation, so that would be one of the exceptions to the rule. And then team members expect direction from the leader. So as I said, my daughter would know, here are the two options of where you're going to be going for school, or these are, I'm going to limit what the options are in order to have you kind of follow as part of that group identity rather than individualism. Next one is inclusion versus privacy. So with inclusion, it's very group-oriented. Individuals know they are automatically included in conversation, meals, and other activities of the group. Possessions are to be used freely by all. That means foods, tools, anything like that. If it's not desirable, it is not desirable to be left to oneself. And it's rude to hold a private conversation or make plans that exclude others present. It's interesting, not desirable to be left to oneself. In the book, Lanier talks about how she was being hosted, can't remember which country it was, but she was being hosted as she went on a trip. And there was this beautiful home, and they had a beautiful guest room for her, and it was put aside. This is where she's going to stay. And the host said to her, first had put down a mattress on the floor beside the bed. And the host said to her, I'm really sorry you're staying on your own, so I've asked somebody else to come and spend time with you so that you're not alone. And she's kind of like, thanks. So it's this idea of it's really beneficial that you have somebody with you, and we're going to provide a roommate, because otherwise you will be alone, and that won't be good. Whereas in privacy, people enjoy having time and space to themselves. People are expected to ask permission to borrow something or even to interrupt the conversation. Each person is considered to be the steward of his or her possessions and has the responsibility to maintain and protect them. In a community setting, it might be common to label your own food, tools, etc. to set them apart from the group's common possessions. And it's acceptable to hold private conversations or make exclusive plans with a few people, not including everyone. Yeah?
So those are flipped to me, like it doesn't, like, yeah.
That's the privacy
That looks like the cold climate.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. They're not in, sorry, yes, this is the hot,
It's the color. Okay.
Yes, I'm
Got
sorry.
it, got it, no.
so the hot culture in this slide is on the left, the cold culture is on the right. Thank you, Regina, thank you.
That's true, you mentioned that too, but I didn't write it for that either.
Yeah, the cold culture is this one, absolutely. And so, in our family, we had invited my mother to come and live with us about 12 years ago. And I recognized that in North American culture, that's not as common. In cold cultures, it's not as common. In hot cultures, it's very common. I had said to my mom, let's, share everything. We'll have our dinners together. We'll have this, we'll have that. Well, my mother is definitely more from a privacy culture. And one of the things that she decided was, how about if I have my own kitchenette, I have everything that I can kind of do, I prepare my own food, I this, I that, I the other thing, and that was fine with us. We were okay with that. It's just one of those things that I recognized as that's from that privacy culture, that's from that cold climate culture that says my stuff is my stuff, your stuff is your stuff. You can think of even when you might have been roommates in college. I'm labeling my milk, you label your milk. These are my things, these are your things, right? So when we come into family, typically we, live more as within our family in that hot culture kind of a way. But when we're living with roommates, we typically live in that more cold culture. All right, so different concepts of hospitality. Very different in hot climate cultures than in cold climate cultures. So, in a hot culture here, cold culture here. So in a hot climate culture, hospitality is spontaneous, often without an advance invitation. It's the context for a relationship, even a business relationship. Hospitality usually takes place in the home, and the host fully takes care of the needs of the guest. The guest, typically in a hot climate culture, pays for nothing. But a gift is usually expected or happily received. Food and drink are involved, and travelers are taken in and provided for. So that's typical in a hot climate culture. In a cold climate culture, hospitality is taken very seriously and is planned for. It's usually not spontaneous. The host usually needs advance notice of a visit.
6 weeks.
Travelers are expected to make their own arrangements other than what is specifically communicated to the host ahead of time. And guests need to expect to pay for their transportation in restaurants if visiting in US or Canada. If the host plans to pay, he usually will say so. And hospitality is a special occasion taking the full attention of the host. One of the things while I read in the book, it was really interesting because as this Lanier was staying in a particular, I think it was Argentina, I can't remember, I'm going to get it wrong. She was staying somewhere in another country, and it was a hot climate culture. And she actually was saying that I'd like to meet the people in the village. I would love to get to know them, but nobody's inviting me over. And she was feeling like, oh my goodness, how come they don't want to get to know me? So she spoke to her mentor, and her mentor said, wow, everybody in the village is all offended. Why don't you want to spend time with them? Why aren't you coming to visit them and be with them? And she said, but how would I know that it's okay to visit? Like, when are they available? When are they free? I don't know. And he says, Sarah, you're going to come, and they're not going to drop everything. You're going to come, and you're going to be a part of whatever's going on in their home. If the kids are playing, we're playing. If they're doing dishes, you're going to do dishes with them. If you're whatever, it's like, okay, this is what we're doing. Whereas in a cold climate culture, it might be we're sitting, we're attending, everything is perfect and in place so that we can sit and enjoy our time together. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go finish what you're saying.
I think that was it.
I was just an observation.
Yeah.
You look at no, I'm from Newfoundland. Everybody knows that. but the play come from away, which has become this big, like, worldwide phenomenon. That's what it's all about. It's just, you're in Newfoundland, we are warm as all heck, even though we're freezing, and, you know, just, we've got you, and it's become this, like, worldwide phenomenon.
Yes.
And it just reminds me when I'm reading different concepts, I'm like,
Yeah, when I was reading, I was looking at it from a Canadian context as well, and thinking, absolutely, in the Maritimes, Newfoundland, yes, absolutely, very warm climate culture, even though it's a cold climate, right?
Yeah.
So there are exceptions, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Boyd.
I think it's about survivability.
Survivability?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you mean?
So you would have extreme hot and extreme cold.
Yeah.
So for instance, the Inuit, nobody owns it.
Mm-hmm.
You come in, you say, well, I want that, you take it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you leave.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's community.
Yeah,
So
based on survival.
based on survival.
Interesting.
So if
Yeah.
you go to a really hot place like in the desert, chances are you will share it if you have water or food or something.
Yeah.
But when you start getting into more temperate,
Mm-hmm.
more hot than temperate, or more cold than temperate,
Mm-hmm.
then you get into those kind of characteristics.
Good perspective, thank you. I like that. All right, so time and planning, I think is the last one that we're going to look at. So in a hot culture, so they're not as oriented toward the clock and as cold climate cultures. They're event oriented. They're spontaneous and flexible in their approach to life. They will respond to what life brings, and saving time is not as important as experiencing the moment. They recognize that structure is required in some areas of life. For example, every country typically has a military, and there's still military time. But overall, they have this, time is about the experience. And they have informal visiting as part of the event. Whereas in a cold climate culture, they're very time-oriented, structured in their approach to life. They enjoy using time efficiently, and saving time is valuable. And so expect the event or dinner, arrival of a guest, and meeting to begin at the time announced. Visiting or informally chatting happens before or after the event. So we can see how, time being, no, it's about the experience, it's about let's have fun. It doesn't matter if we get there on time. I was talking to Nicole this morning, and she was saying how in one of her visits, in Colombia, we're waiting upon somebody and the meeting is at noon. Well, the meeting at noon means I'm going to leave where I am at noon, and I'm going to get to you when I get there, and that's when we start, right? Whereas in a cold climate culture, it's, how come we haven't started the event? It starts at noon. And so you see that there can be some things that we need to have some understanding from one person to another based on their values for one reason or another. So from that, the expectation from this time together is not that we understand everything about every culture and have a full grasp of every detail. What the expectation is that we would understand and know that there are some differences, that differences exist, and hopefully this will help us to, when working with and dealing with people from other cultures, just to have a starting point to know we don't want to be offended by one another. We don't want to be upset because this one did this and that one did that. Because there's often very good reasons why people are doing things the way that they're doing it. And very good reasons why everybody has a reason for why they do the things that they do. And so it's really that foundation of understanding and asking and creating that communication so that we can have a better, working relationship with people all around the globe. So with that, what I'd like to do, I think there's 6 tables. So in your table group, but first there was a question.
Yeah, we'll finish explaining and then I'll...
In your table group, I'm going to break it up into, I'll give you a particular area, and I want you to look at potential, knowing that there could be conflict between the groups, between different groups. What would be a way that you would go about working through an issue, and then we'll share those with the team. Yeah?
So, I don't know if anybody else noticed this, but I noticed this. just as we're reading kind of the general definitions of both hot and cold, and it made me think about a question. So it makes me think the Bible, when we read the Bible, I feel like it's a very hot climate. Like the way things were done, the way they, and so sometimes, like I wonder, people coming from a cold climate, how they respond to the Bible, right? Like when they're reading it and going through it. Like it just hit me, because a lot of the Bible is about relationship, right? It's about making disciples. It's about going out of there. It's about, and so I'm just like, wow, that's interesting. And even within churches, you can see the hot climate people, like Mitchell, who rents a room in my home. He's Nigerian, so they have no concept of time. Their church lasts all day. It's very relational. But then we have kind of our Western churches, which is very, rigid in their, this is the time, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So I just find that interesting.
So yes, it is very interesting, and we definitely want to look at it not as a right or wrong. We want to look at it as we all have our values, and they come from a certain place, and how do we, as Christians, as brothers and sisters, work well with one another, and not try to change anybody, but we're this way for a reason, and ultimately, of course, when we look at identity, my identity comes as an individual, my identity comes from a group. Ultimately, as we come to know Christ, our identity comes from Him, right? And so my guess is that likely, as we understand one another better, we're just going to become more and more Christ-like, whatever that looks like, right? So in your teams,
There's just one quick little observation that we just made over here. About the fascinating point is when you look at Greenbelt today, our largest growth this past year has happened with a huge influx of people from the hot climate cultures. That is where we are growing by leaps and bounds, is more and more people, because again, there's a big cultural difference where they invite their family to church, they invite their friends to church, whereas we're more private, we're more, we don't want to impose on anybody, and so you can see the pockets of these growing, so it's just a really fascinating time for us as a church.
And that's why I saw it as really important that we be equipped to understand, from, different cultural backgrounds and values, and to look at the scripture. We don't have to go anywhere to make disciples of all the nations. We can go a lot of places. Missions are important, but right here we can go and make disciples of all nations. Yeah.
Seems to be the big idea here is vive la différence.
Vive la différence. Yeah, exactly. And how do we, because it's interesting, before we did the merger with the Arabic speaking congregation, there was a sense of, okay, we need training to understand that culture. And I'm not sure we need training to understand that culture. We need training to, how do we look at values and differences and vive la différence. Yeah, go ahead.
And also, we have so much to learn, like the Arabic, like they're so warm and they're so counter-Canadian culture, like we really should pick up a lot of that because it's a gift to have that, right? These other cultures they're different, but it's amazing how we're insular and on our own, and when we even let a little bit of that infiltrate, it's huge, right? So,
yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I want to add something here that even we from Africa, we also are taking some things from the people in the Western world, which is according to the Bible. You cannot keep God waiting. Like you say, they're conscious of time. But in church, we are. It's just that maybe some few churches, just like she said, one Nigerian church, they go to church and stay all day. Me worshiping in Africa, I would go to church and stay all day. We spend just an hour in church, and we have about 5 services. With one service, about 5,000 people. Wow. So we were like shown in the Bible that you cannot keep God waiting. If you say to God, 8 o'clock, God might even be there at 7:55 with you. That's God. He's showing us the example. Jesus never showed us in the Bible. He said, I'm going to be here, and then he got there, and Jesus was not even there. He was never great.
Yeah, no one would
He's
waste.
faithful and he's trying to raise us and we should have integrity. So those things too, we also in Africa, we also pick.
So what I like what you're saying is we all have something to learn
Yeah,
from
just
one
like
another.
the book
Yeah.
is like kind of direct.
Yeah.
It's direct, it's mixing the two. No culture is better than the other.
No,
We're just mixing everything and it's helping us.
Yeah, good,
You grab something from us, we grab from you.
very good.
We're all
Great.
set up.
Thank you for that. All right, so at this table group, I want you guys to discuss the idea of relationship versus task-oriented, or orientation, okay? And then coming up with how will we work through this. This table group, I'd like you to talk about direct versus indirect communication. Now, it'll let me know which one you're going for, because it'll take longer if you're doing indirect.
Which are we?
I'm not really sure what she's asking.
How have we lived together?
We believe the Bible when it says one body and one spirit.
And you guys time and plan.
How do we, what are some of the solutions?
Danielle, yes, how do we like, what do you think, what would be relationship and